Good morning, good afternoon, good evening all. I am Rahel Damso. I am an OB-GYN working at Addis Ababa University, the Preeclampsia Hospital. The study I will be presenting today has a title as Association of Dietary Calcium Intake, Total and Ionized Serum Calcium Levels with Preeclampsia in Ethiopia. We declare that there are no conflict of interest. We know preeclampsia is one of the obstetric problems, contributing about 5 to 10% of all obstetric complications. More than 50,000 maternal deaths each year are from preeclampsia. Prevalence in Ethiopia is almost similar with the global prevalence, but new reviews and studies show that it is on an increase in prevalence. The pathophysiology of preeclampsia has not been fully understood. All the hypotheses given are multifactorial. The role of calcium and magnesium deficiencies as a cause of preeclampsia is now getting interest in the past few years. The way calcium deficiency explaining the preeclampsia is when there is decrease in dietary calcium intake, though dietary calcium intake is not the only factor to contribute for serum calcium levels. When there is decrease in dietary calcium intake, there will be decrease in serum calcium concentrations, which will induce the release of parathyroid hormone, in turn increasing the intracellular calcium levels and ending up in systemic vasoconstriction and hypertension. The body's calcium is found in free and bound forms. Around 50% of the calcium in our body is found in ionized or free form. Around 40% is bound to protein and the rest to anions. The ionized calcium is said to be the biologically active and tightly regulated by hormones. In pregnancy, the total calcium level is highly affected by the hemodilution of pregnancy, though there are other disorders that can affect the total calcium level. Mainly in pregnancy, the hemodilution would affect the amount of total calcium level. So ionized calcium level, though, it remains constant throughout gestation. So that makes it by far the most important index in pregnancy to know the level of calcium in our body. With all the evidences and research done, WHO has recommends now the calcium supplementation around 1.5 to 2 grams per day with different formulations for starting from mid-gestation until the end for prevention of preeclampsia for those populations with generally low dietary calcium intake. Are we a population with low dietary calcium intake? Yes, a national survey has shown that the dietary calcium intake of an average Ethiopian woman in the childbearing age is very low, which is around 300 milligrams per day. That is in comparison to the required dietary amount, which is a minimum of 1,000 milligrams per day. So specifically on pregnancy, there are few studies done in Ethiopia, and still the calcium intake during pregnancy is still below the required dietary allowance. So the WHO recommends calcium supplementation, and that as a society includes us because we're one of the population with low dietary calcium intake. So, but this recommendation is context specific because the cost and the burden of drug should be considered when we want to incorporate this recommendation into a local context. So the aims of this study are to see the association of dietary calcium intake, serum total calcium level, and ionized calcium level with preeclampsia. Along with that, we will evaluate the correlation between dietary calcium intake, the serum, and the serum levels, because not necessarily does dietary calcium intake reflect the serum calcium levels. There are other, the calcium metabolism is highly controlled or regulated by multiple factors. It could be hormones, could be dietary intake, or it could be through other different feedback loops. So we want to see whether in this study participants have correlation with the dietary calcium intake and the serum calcium levels, and we saw also this, the correlation between serum total calcium level and ionized calcium level. We used an unmatched case control study in 3 hospitals in Addis Ababa, the capital. The sample size was calculated using an unmatched case control study sample size calculation formula, and we studied 42 cases and 42 controls. The cases were recruited based on the current International Society for the Study of Hypertension in Pregnancy definition of preeclampsia, which was launched in 2019. Only incidental cases were recruited to decrease the recall bias, which is a main problem in case control studies. We included women aged more than 18 years with gestational age of 20 weeks and more, and with singleton pregnancies. Any illness that can affect the mineral levels of the body, and as well any women taking antenatal and mineral supplementation were excluded from the study. The controls were selected from the hospitals, though in case control studies, hospital controls are not the best controls and it's not recommended, but the other options which are supposed to be better were not found to be feasible in our study. One is a neighborhood method. That means it's very unlikely to find a woman who is pregnant in the neighborhood of that woman. And the population controls, it is not feasible to also recruit population controls. But we used strict inclusion and exclusion criteria to have the best out of these participants. We included women who came for normal antenatal care follow-up, or with obstetric conditions like previous cesarean section, or other women that can otherwise follow pregnancy at health centers, and any risk factors that could contribute for preeclampsia in the current or previous pregnancies, such as APHN2 pregnancies, were excluded from the control lists. We used a systematic random sampling. The medical and obstetric history were gathered using a structured questionnaire, and the dietary calcium intake information is gathered using a 24-hour dietary recall. The serum levels of total serum calcium and ionized calcium were measured using an inductively coupled mass spectrophotometer. And all the care that should be taken laboratory-wise were up to the standard. Data was analyzed using SPSS version 25, and p-value of less than 0.05 was taken as statistically significant. Ethical clearance was obtained from IRB of Addis Ababa University, and this study was funded by an NIH-funded project, Medical Education Partnership Initiative at Addis Ababa University. Coming to the results, majority of the cases, around 80%, were preeclampsia with severe features, and most of the controls had low-risk pregnancies. The remaining had scarred uterus, postpartum pregnancies, malpresentations, and premature rupture of membranes. Main obstetric variables were comparable between the cases and controls, except the gestational age. where you see a significant difference between the cases and the controls. That is one because of because it's an unmatched control study. We didn't match for any of the parameters. The other is there is a high tendency that preeclamptic women would deliver, be it indicated or not, they would deliver earlier compared with the controls. So that showed a significant difference. Otherwise, all the other obstetric parameters were comparable. So the comparison of the total serum calcium, ionized calcium level, and dietary calcium level was seen. So the mean total serum calcium level was low in the preeclamptic women compared with the controls, as well as the required, the reference levels for total calcium level. That is the same with ionized calcium level. It is found to be low in the preeclamptic cases. In the dietary calcium, those preeclamptic women had a lower dietary calcium intake, which is around 704 milligrams per day, compared with 1,115 milligram per day. So that is low in preeclamptic women, though, and it is low compared with the required dietary allowance. So that is, though it is expected and found this way, it is better in this study. The amount of dietary calcium intake in pregnant women compared to the previous studies, a few previous studies, were found to be better in this study. But there is a difference, significant difference in the intake between cases and controls. So nearly 70% of cases or the preeclamptic women had low total serum calcium concentrations compared with the 36% of the controls. Majority of the cases had low ionized calcium level. And almost half of the controls had a normal dietary calcium intake, but 35% of the kids had normal, calcium intake. So this is a main finding from the multivariate logistic regression. So the odds of being preeclamptic is around 8 times higher in those who have low ionized calcium level. And this figure is the same with the total serum calcium level as well. The odds of having preeclampsia is 3 times higher in those with low, in those participants with low total serum calcium level. So there are adequate studies worldwide considering the total serum calcium level, and our study finding also goes with that. Majority of the cases from different countries, from low income to high income, but the calcium level is probably, this study is probably an original study. We, up to our knowledge, there is no study in English language that compared, tried to see ionized calcium level and its association with preeclampsia. It was difficult to compare this parameter, and this study will give an insight as an original contribution to look into, to further look into the the association of ionized calcium, the impact of ionized calcium level with preeclampsia, because it is known that it is ionized calcium level which is a more and a very reliable way of detecting calcium compared with total serum calcium level during pregnancy, because it will not be affected by parameters like hemodilation. We also tried to see the correlation, like we said earlier, the correlation between, does that mean that the serum calcium, the dietary calcium amount that people take, did it affect that, or did correlate with the ionized calcium level or the dietary calcium amount? So Pearson correlation, what we saw is there was positive moderate correlation between total serum calcium level and ionized calcium level, but the dietary calcium intake did not show any correlation with either ionized calcium level or with total serum calcium level. And this is depicted by the Pearson correlation coefficient of 0.305, which is a moderate correlation with p-value of 0.004. So again, on chi-square test, the dietary calcium intake did not show any significant association with any of the obstetric or socio-demographic or the calcium levels in general. The severity of preeclampsia showed association with total serum calcium levels. So in conclusion, this study showed significant association between low dietary calcium intake and low serum calcium levels, both total and ionized, with preeclampsia. So this is a supportive local evidence for the current context-specific recommendation of calcium supplementation in low dietary calcium consumption societies to prevent preeclampsia. So we recommend an implementation study, a proper implementation study, to look into the feasibility of routine calcium supplementation for pregnant women, starting from mid-gestation until up to the end. Until then, though, we recommend a health education on the importance of adequate dietary consumption of calcium-rich foods during pregnancy. And we also see importance in undergoing large-scale study that can explain the complex interaction between ionized calcium level, total serum calcium level levels with preeclampsia. So this study is probably the first study in English language that tried to observe the relation of preeclampsia with, specifically with serum ionized calcium level. So we see that as the strength of this study. Case control studies are highly subject for different kinds of bias. We tried to decrease those bias. For example, to decrease the investigator-administered bias, we masked the data collectors. And to decrease the recall bias, we recruited the incident cases. But though we have shown an effort, these kinds of bias could not be eliminated completely. So we see this could be the limitation of this study. Thank you.